Welcome back to another episode. Answering Dr. Michael Brown, 1991 lecture, and answering Jewish objections to Jesus. This is going to be a great episode. Don't go away. Rabbi Moshe Shulman has much in store for you. Sit tight. We'll be right back. Welcome to Tanakh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live out of Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of... This one's called Fair Weights and Measures by Rabbi Moshe Shulman. So you guys are going to want to hang tight. Got a great episode showing for you tonight. Rabbi, it's welcome. It's a pleasure to have you back in the studio again tonight, as usual. Thank you so much for your time and your dedication to helping us steer clear of untruths. That's kind of the best way I could say it. So thank you again for your time. Just for people tuning in for the first time, Dr. Michael Brown has spent his career in seeking to guide Jewish people towards the Christian New Testament Messiah using extreme measures. And when I say extreme, I mean going through rabbinic literature, an area where most people are unable to respond. Our guest that we have on this particular show is one person who is very well more than prepared to be able to respond to every claim that he has ever made. In fact, that's the whole purpose of the show. He's going to be responding to Dr. Michael Brown's books, to different lectures he's made with great detail. So if you've read the books, like we actually have a copy, by the way, of Jewish Objections to Jesus, and I actually bought it while I was Messianic, and I never read it. But now I'm actually kind of glancing at it since you're on the show, and I'm actually very delighted to have you to kind of help us work through this thing. So thank you all. And thank you all for tuning in. Be sure, if you like what's going on here, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Turn on notifications. If you don't turn on notifications, subscribing does you no benefit whatsoever. Speaking of which, Rabbi, look on the YouTube channel now. If you see a live link, click on it. Do you see it there yet?
I was looking at it before, and I actually didn't see anything.
Okay, refresh your screen. There's a little half circle with an arrow attached to the top, the very top. Click on that.
Let me go back to there again.
Okay, sure. That way you can kind of see what we're doing and see what everybody else is seeing as well. So this will be our third episode. The first episode, the first few episodes was very much Rabbi taking time to basically telling everybody what he's going to tell you, kind of like a college professor would, if you will, before he actually tells you what he's going to tell you. So tonight I think we're going to get into the telling part a little bit more than the first two episodes. So if you haven't, if you missed the first two episodes, definitely want to go back and check those out. And so tonight, again, the title that Rabbi has chosen, Fair Weights and Measures. And the title, of course, is Answering Dr. Michael Brown's 1991 lecture in Answering Jewish Objections to Jesus, called Unfair Weights and Measures. And it's specifically going to be addressing claims made in that particular lecture. And that's where we're headed tonight. So with all that said, we will see how this thing goes. And Rabbi, are you about ready to rock and roll? Did you find the YouTube link? Are you able to log on?
Yes, I'm there right now. I can actually see you. I'm trying to see if I can have it set up so I can at least see what's going on in the chat.
Oh, yeah. Very good. Very good. Once the chat begins...
I'm not going to be able to answer everything from it, but at least I have it there.
I'll try to assist you in keeping track of that as well. So I'll kind of insert a few questions from time to time if I can squeeze them in, okay? All right. Very good, sir.
Okay.
All right.
There's one more smaller thing I'm going to do here.
All right. Very good.
Okay. As William was saying, the last 2 weeks we basically did a little introduction about what the Tanakh is and the books we have. The next place really where we should go is to discuss the difference between Tanakh and the New Testament. But before I can do it, I really need to address a lecture that Dr. Brown did in 1991 called Unequal Weights and Measures. It's been around there. It's actually in the 5th volume of his book in the appendix. I've had it quoted to me by very, very many missionaries. It's subtitled Critique of the Methodology of the Anti-Missionaries. Excuse me. So before I actually start getting into my actual critique of, missionaries themselves, since the first lecture was really more or less to give you an idea of the way Judaism looks at things. I start doing the New Testament, it'll be somewhat different. So this lecture is going to be fair weights and measures, because I'm going to look to his lecture on unequal weights and measures. Now, the best way to understand what he's saying there is I will just read a little bit from what he says there. Okay, so he says, the biblical injunction against false weights and measures is repeated throughout the Hebrew scriptures, elaborated in the Talmud, treated under 3 separate headings in the rabbinic literature on the 613 commandments, and codified by Maimonides in his Mishnah Torah, taking up 2 whole chapters by Yaakov ben Ushar in his Abba Turim, and by Yosef Karo in the Shulchan Aruch, the entry in Choshen Mishpat, including 20 divisions. If you don't you don't know what that is, when we get to discussions about the oral law, I'll explain what each and every one of these books are. Basically, he's talking about trying to impress you with his knowledge of primary works of Jewish law. The first occurrence of this important commandment at the close of the holiness precepts in Leviticus 19. By the way, the holiness precepts is really what the non-Jews call it. That's not what we call it in Judaism. Just a point I want to point out to you. The rabbinic literature is never referred to that. His sources are from secular sources, not Jewish religious sources.
Oh, wow.
And the verse says there, you shall not falsify measures of length, width, or capacity. You shall have an honest balance, honest weights, an honest ephah, and an honest hin. I, the Lord, am your God, who freed you from the land of Egypt. You shall face well the Mizargs and wills, I am the Lord. Okay, he brings it from the NJV, so it doesn't make much difference, and it goes on. Now, what he says, and it's on page 3 of mine, I don't know what page is in the book, but something like that. But what has all this got to do with the anti-missionaries? Simply everything. Their whole practice of using one canon of criticism when treating the New Testament, while using an entirely different canon of criticism when treating the Tanakh and the Talmud, smacks of the practice of false weights and measures. It is an abomination in the eyes of the Lord, and it can only bring disgrace to the anti-missionaries. Now, the reason why I am using this before we actually start getting into some of the more meaty material that I know some of you people are just dying to get, is because I need to answer this question right in the beginning. Because he's got something false here. Now, what's false about it is that if you look at the verse in Leviticus there, Vayikra, it says that you're supposed to have honest weights, and then it specifies which ones, an honest ephah and an honest hin. If you're not familiar with Hebrew, you really don't know what the verse is really saying. In English, we have the same thing. Those in English as a metric also. So we have solid weights, kilos, kilograms, and we have liquid weights, liters or milliliters. In English, it's pounds and gallons, ounces, gallons. Well, the same thing has been discussed. Ephah is the measurement for solid weights. Hin is a measurement for liquids. 2 different things. You can't measure a solid with a liquid. It doesn't make sense, and it would be actually a violation if you would measure, for example, wine by the kilogram. It would be a violation. That's what the Torah says not to do. And the opposite, if you were to measure your bread by a liquid weight, by liters, milliliters, whatever.
Right, that wouldn't work.
It would also be. That's what the commandment is. So from the beginning, we see there's something a little bit funny with what Brown is saying. Unequal weights and measures. Well, the Torah actually prescribes unequal weights and measures. It prescribes a measurement for your liquid weights and measure for solid weights. Now, this actually is really what the issue is here right now. Okay? What we have to look at it as, and what my goal here is to point out that there are actually some really fundamental differences between Judaism and Christianity, what they believe, what they hold for as their truth, where they gain their truth from. In the first lecture that I gave on the Tanakh, I think you're beginning to get a little bit of an idea that as Jews, we look at the Tanakh completely differently. Okay, and we're going to see a lot more of that as we go along. We discuss more and more. We're going to see a lot more of where the differences there are between Christianity and Judaism. But really, fundamentally, there are fundamental differences between Judaism and Christianity, how we look at things. And I just want to give you a little bit. A lot of the stuff is going to come out, and I'm going to actually go through his specific categories. I was doing what we do a thought experiment a lot of times. You see in a lot of literature, more philosophical literature. And I thought about this. If there was no New Testament, what would be the status of Christianity and Judaism? No New Testament, absolutely no Christianity whatsoever. It couldn't exist without the New Testament.
Right.
Okay. Judaism, we're just fine without it. I mean,
Right.
New Testament's totally irrelevant as far as we're concerned. So, it has nothing to do with it. So Judaism would go on just fine. Now, what if there was no Tanakh at all? The Torah and the Nevi'im, there was absolutely no Tanakh at all from beginning to end, nothing. We found some out that somebody came and found it was totally false, whatever, and not there anymore. Then, of course, neither Judaism and Christianity would be true. What would be the case if the Torah was true? The events on Mount Sinai and everything, the Torah was absolutely factual, but there was problems with the rest of the Tanakh, with the prophets. Maybe somebody wrote it, maybe it wasn't the prophets. There's some problem with that. Christianity would have a very big problem. Judaism wouldn't. We could live without it. You're missing a lot of important things from there, but actually later on you'll find out. We're going to go through actually all the messianic prophecies in the Tanakh from starting the beginning to the very end, and you find that by the end you get to the Tanakh, by the end you get to the Torah, you have enough to know that there's going to be Mashiach and pretty much what it's going to look like when it happens. Some of the details we find out later on, but basically you pretty much know what's going to look like with Mashiach until then. So Judaism could work pretty good without the Tanakh. It could work with the Torah, but we could pretty much, our daily life, what we do, what we live, how we dress, pious on your head, and this is Leviticus 19. That's what we pious are, Leviticus 19. We could go for the Torah, but without the Tanakh, something's missing, but we'd still be able to do it. Remember, we're talking theoretically, because both me and Dr. Brown believe that the Tanakh is from Hashem, divine inspiration for all of it. Torah was written by God's orders, and the prophets what was in the prophets is from divine inspiration or direct communication from God and written down. There's no question about that. I'm saying to think about it for a second, because what we're talking about here is, are the measurements between Judaism and Christianity actually equal or not? The point I'm trying to make is they're not. Now, so if there was only the Torah, but we didn't have the Tanakh, Judaism would be quite fine. Christianity couldn't exist. All of the things that Christians distort to really make their stuff primarily comes from the Tanakh. It doesn't come from the Torah.
Just real quick, if you don't mind, clarify to the new viewers what you mean by Torah and Nach. They don't understand.
Okay,
Tanakh.
Torah is specifically the first 5 books.
Right.
In English, Genesis, Exodus, Leviticus, Numbers, and Deuteronomy. I know the Hebrew's quicker. So I'm trying to
I can see you hesitating with the English. That's funny.
Yeah.
Good.
Okay, that's what it is. When we say Torah, Torah has many uses by a Jew. Okay, when we're talking about Scripture, when we're talking about Tanakh, Torah means the first 5 books. A Jew will sometimes Torah meaning anything that has to do with God, even something that appears in the Talmud or law that comes later on. We refer to that also as Torah in the general sense, because Torah means teaching, learning. So it really is that. But when we're talking in this particular issue of the Torah, Torah is different. That was given directly from God, and it was told specifically to write it down. At the end of Deuteronomy, so it was told specifically to write it down. So it is something special. Okay? So if we had only the Torah and we didn't have Nach, we'd live. Now, another question is, and this is going to be very hard, you're not even going to believe this one, what happens if we didn't have a Talmud? If there was no Talmud, we had a Tanakh, we didn't have a Talmud. It doesn't affect Christianity at all, by the way.
Let me do an insert real fast, and I think you'll appreciate this because I think in a small way it actually pertains to this question on YouTube. Maria says, my question is, why Torah had to stop where it is? I think New Testament exists because people wanted to continue something miraculous, something they thought was from God, and here we are today, confusion.
Okay, that issue basically, William, I discussed it actually last week. Why they have this? The Torah ends actually when the promises that were given to Abraham were about to be fulfilled. Okay?
Okay.
So the purpose of the Torah is specifically to give the law that the Jewish people are supposed to have and bring them up to the place where they're going to the land. In fact, the rabbi said that the only thing that we need to have is really the Torah. Everything was written because of specific reasons that we want to have it. So Joshua is basically about the actual fulfillment of giving everything. But we didn't really need to have this stuff because there's certain lessons in there that'll come out. When we learn about sin and atonement, I'll give you at least one other ones. But so the Torah is the first 5 books. The reason why we have other books is because they tell us something. Again, as I point out, there are many prophets in the book of Kings, for example, that are mentioned, book of Samuel and Kings. Samuel, we have no book from him about any of his prophecies in the future. Nothing. We have his life story, what he did, but we don't have anything else with that. Elijah the prophet, we don't have very much anything either about that. These things are there because when it was decided, the beginning of the Persian era, that we need, these are the books that we're going to consider our canon. These are the prophets that we need to know for the future. We have the Torah that God gave us to write down. We have that. But there are other things that are important. These are the ones. So these are the prophecies from Isaiah we need to know. Other prophecies Isaiah had we don't have because, they weren't necessary. And all the things that Elijah said, except for those specific stories, we have no idea what he said. I mean, he wasn't quiet the whole time, obviously. He lived for a number of years, and he obviously said a lot of things. We only have the little things that were there that are necessary for us to know. So anyways, let me go back to the Talmud now.
Okay. If
we did not have a Talmud, but we still had the Tanakh, Judaism would exist as it is now. You might understand, but I can give you a little example of why. Many people heard about the Rambam, wrote a work called Mishnah Torah, which is a compilation of the legal material and the legal decisions of what we're supposed to do. And later, a couple hundred years later, was something written called, 100 years later, it was called the Arbaturim, and after that was the Shulchan Aruch. And these are codes of Jewish law. But before that, nothing was written down as far as that. There were little books written down, but there was no actual central compendium of this stuff. Now, the reason, and Judaism, until the time of the Talmud ended, until they started writing these things, were also hundreds of years. Judaism did not need a book for that. It's based on practice and legal things, so it was just not necessary. So we could actually exist without, just like they exist without a Shulchan Aruch or the Rambam for 1,000 years, basically. So essentially, we don't need it. It's important, and it's fundamental, and we believe that it's Hashem's will that we should have that, and it's very important. You'll see over the time when we discuss about it why it's important, but essentially we can live without it. So the bottom line here of what I'm trying to say is like this. There is a fundamental difference between Judaism and Christianity. Christianity must have the Tanakh and the New Testament also. Judaism doesn't need the New Testament. Judaism only needs the Tanakh. And even that, it would only be the Torah for that. Torah is merely for fundamental. Okay? So we see fundamentally that there is a difference between Christianity and Judaism. Christianity is not Judaism plus Jesus. There's much more fundamentally that's different with it. As I mentioned last week, what's fundamentally different is the Tanakh is the history of the Jewish people. Everything in it is either the history of the Jewish people or events or things that prophets were told that are necessary for the Jewish people specifically to know in the future. And that's why we have it. Whereas the New Testament, the Christians, when they look at the New Testament, they don't look at it as history. They look at it more as a fictional, maybe historical fiction. They don't really look at it as, they look at it as like a foreshadowing or allegorical. They don't look at it in the simple level as Abraham took his son physically to slaughter on the mountain. King David was an actual king. He had a son Solomon who built an actual real temple. In the Torah, when it talks about this week's portion, last week's portion, this week, talk about the priests and the tabernacle and the clothes they're supposed to wear. They were real priests. And there, of those, as I mentioned, there are those of us today. I have two sons-in-law, so direct descendants from father to son. I'm descendant to a female line, going back to Aaron. These are real people, real events, real things. Whereas in Christian literature, when you read it, and this starts from the very beginning, Christian literature has always looked at the Tanakh more allegorical. Okay? So these are fundamental differences. Fundamental differences. So essentially what I'm saying is like this, is that some of the reasons what I'm saying fundamentally is like this, is that Judaism and Christianity are not the same thing. And so when we deal with the claims of Judaism and criticizing James' claims of Judaism, which, by the way, have been done in the past, and the claims of Christianity, we don't always have to approach them the same way. What I just said is just one thing, but there's more things about it. For example, very well known, Brown belongs to part of the Reformation Church after Martin Luther. And he accepts Martin Luther's principles of sola scriptura, for example, that everything has to come from Scripture. He believes not only that everything has to come from Scripture, but he believes in the inerrancy of Scripture. He believes the New Testament is inerrant. He believes that Tanakh is inerrant. Now, in Judaism, we don't have that. We don't believe in inerrancy. Anybody who's learned the Talmud, read the commentaries, knows that the concept of inerrancy that Christians have, we don't have. Okay. Now, another issue that has to come up, and this comes up very interesting in some of the discussions we have here. There was a person, the first canon of Christian canon actually came about in the early 2nd century by someone who's considered a heretic. His name is Marcion. Marcion had in his canon, and we're going to discuss when we talk about the canon of the New Testament, we'll get into this a little bit deeper. He had the book of Luke without the birth of Jesus in it, and he had some of the letters of Paul, held very strongly from Paul. He believed that the Old Testament, what he called it, the Tanakh, was not from God. He only believed in the New Testament. Now, we actually find a lot of times in Christian literature hangovers from that. For example, Marcion wrote a book comparing the God of the New Testament and the God of the Tanakh, showing how they're different. And we see this in Christianity a lot of discussion. For example, you will find Christians talking about the God of the Old Testament as being jealous and angry and vindictive and all kinds of stuff, whereas the God of the New Testament is love and everything like that. We can argue about that. That's a different story when we come over. After we learn a little bit about some of these things, we find it's not really the case. But the fact is that in Christianity, you have this distinction. This goes back to Marcion and the early Christians, where they really denigrated the Tanakh in that way. Brown doesn't do that, by the way, but you have to keep in mind that there is an underlying undercurrent of this that you always have to keep in mind in some of these things. Now, when Brown says here specifically that Jews are, counter-missionaries are using a different type of standard and stuff like that, what he's really doing is he's trying to forestall any kind of real discussion, serious discussion, which will take into account some of these differences. Now, I will say now, and I'm going to do it by the end of this, and it's going to take us a couple of weeks to go through his whole thing, and I will do it by the end. There are some criticisms that can be made about some people who do counter-missionary work against the missionaries, and certain standards that obviously I believe in also. So it's not totally, open field to do whatever you want. I mean, there are certain ways you're supposed to approach these subjects, and those, counter-missions, who you certainly know about, Toby Singer, Mike Skolback, all these people, we all follow these same type of understanding rules. But there are fundamental differences in what we can say about the New Testament as opposed to what we say about the Tanakh. And we're going to get into a lot of that issue. But however, the thing is like this. Brown is a missionary. If you're a missionary, it means you're trying to convince somebody else to follow your belief. That means you have to be open to any question somebody asks you, whether you like it or not. Jews, on the other hand, we don't go out and teach our religion to people like that. We don't say, we don't come here to, hey, convert, we want you to. People come to us, they read the Tanakh, and they realize the truthfulness of it and the holiness of it. So, they want to know about it, we teach and stuff like that. But we don't go out, making people, to become Jews and stuff like that. That's not what we do. Now, another point that I want to make in the same vein is that this is actually something that's quite true with Judaism. Judaism has always had to answer questions about Judaism based on what Judaism believes. In fact, some of the questions he has here are things we answer all the time. In fact, the first known work written, Jewish work written, in order to answer such questions was written by Josephus. It's called Contra Appian, which I did mention last week talking about the Tanakh. Contra Appian mentions that. It was a work on polemics where he, apologetics, where he tries to answer a Greek who attacked Judaism. I mean, it's well known that the Greeks did not really like Judaism very much. The Romans didn't like Judaism very much. They made fun of Jewish practices. Circumcision was called self-mutilization. A lot of other things were said about it. It's very interesting about that. Maybe I might sometime in the future have a lecture on anti-Semitism historical. But the point here is that if you're out there, you're going to be answered questions. There's absolutely no excuse that you should not answer questions that are asked you, even if these questions are not serious. You have to be able to provide answers, especially if you're somebody out there. I get asked questions all the time. So Brown by himself is a missionary. To say that questions being asked of him are illegitimate is not. What is important, and this I agree, is not that the weights and measures should be equal, but they should be fair, meaning they should take into consideration Christian beliefs. For example, I'm not going to tell Mike Brown that he should believe something because the Talmud interprets it a certain way. That would obviously be a case of unfairness on my part. Likewise, he shouldn't expect me to quote to me from the New Testament and expect me to accept that as being true because we don't believe it. So, again, we're talking about fair weights and measures, not equal weights and measures, or a question of unequal weights and measures, but fair weights and measures. Now, in this article itself, besides this issue that I'm talking about now, one of the problems in this article, and something we find throughout Dr. Brown's books, and I'm picking on Dr. Brown right now, but it's really true, we find this also in many other works written by missionaries towards Jews, are a number of logical fallacies. They make arguments, in debate, a debate type argument, and the problem with the argument is it's based on a fallacious logic. It doesn't really prove, it sounds good, but it's really based on false argumentation. Now, what I've written down now, and I'd like to go in some of the rest of the time that we have here, and deal with some of them that we see actually in Brown here, and some that we see some of his later books also. So you get a sort of a feel of what we're trying to do, because in what I'm going to be going through, I'm actually going to be avoiding all of these things and bringing just clear, logical answers to these things, not what he has here. Now, the first one that I'd like to do is what's called poisoning the well. Now, I have a few sources here on logic that I have in my collection. I have a number of infantry collections. I learned these things in order to make things work. The first one that I want to do is something called poisoning the well. Let me read you what that means. And if you read what Brown says here, you see right away that that's exactly what he did. This is a book on logic, practical logic. It's a very simple book. It's probably very good to if you're getting involved in any kind of discussions and debates, it's good to get a work that deals with fallacies, so you know exactly what you're going to be saying and that it should be logical. So here's what we have here. The fallacy of pointing to the well occurs when, prior to deliberation, we place an opponent in a position that excludes an unwanted reply. This is not the same thing as logically refuting a certain position. Rather, in the case of poisoning the well, we assume prior to discussion a position that arbitrarily and without logical justification excludes a point of view by decree. By merely decreeing the unacceptable of our opponent's position, we in effect assume the truth of our own. That is essentially what he said in that little paragraph here that I read, where he says the unequal weights and measures. This refers to the criticism that we bring, kind of mission being different. He's poisoning the well, trying to make it seem that any kind of thing that a counter-missionary say is actually not to be accepted because it's just not a logical or correct argument. Now, in another article here I brought down, okay, it says here, and just keep in mind we're just about counter-missionaries being hypocritical here.
Okay.
This sort of reason involves trying to discredit what a person might later claim by presenting unfavorable information, that they're hypocritical. About the person, this argument has the following form. Unfavorable information about person A is presented. They're hypocrites. They use different things. Therefore, any claims A made will be false. So therefore, because of that, they should be not listened to. This sort of reason is obviously fallacious. The person making such an attack is hoping that the unfavorable information will bias listeners against the person in question. This is very common.
Hey, Rabbi, do me a favor. Would you reread that and go a little bit slower? It was kind of quick to follow. You're a fast reader, so and I think your mouth is as fast as your brain is. So, if you
unfortunately, I go very quick. Okay. This sort of reason involves trying to discredit what a person might later claim by presenting unfavorable information.
Right.
Be it about the person. So saying that we are using incorrect weights and measures is certainly a way of poisoning the well before even listening to what they say. Even though I'm going to argue here he's incorrect about it, but doing what he's trying to do here is actually to poison the well beforehand, make people not even want to listen to us.
I would like to make a comment exactly on that. There was a video that a friend of mine, an old friend of mine, we were in the church together, then we kind of drifted off in the Messianic circle together, but separately for years, where he stayed in the Messianic circle, and I kind of left it altogether and went strictly Torah. And later on, he sent me a video basically kind of mocking what I was doing with Rabbi Singer. As it turned out, Dr. Michael Brown had grabbed a hold of one of the videos, maybe episode 45 of me and Rabbi Singer. And what he did was he took the video and he took like 30 minutes on a 15 or 20 second statement. And so I watched the video, and what he did, he spent the first 10 minutes trying to discredit Rabbi Singer so no one would believe him before he even presented any facts. And to me, that's dirty pool. You know, for me, it should be about the facts and only the facts. Forget about quoting somebody that they said something 25 years ago. You know, people revise their thoughts all the time, and he's very, very apt on taking you out at the knees before you even start the debate. And this is kind of a practice that I've seen him do.
Yeah, it's very common with missionaries. I mean, for example, missionaries will tell people not to speak to me or Toby or somebody like that.
Right.
And I do the exact opposite. Whenever I've dealt with anybody, I said, listen, you speak to anybody. I don't care who you speak to. Speak to Dr. Brown if you want.
Right.
It doesn't make a difference who you speak to, because the truth is the truth. It doesn't make a difference.
Exactly.
Now, Dr. Brown, I've even asked him to listen, why don't you let me speak to any of the Orthodox people that speak to you? I mean, you're more than willing to speak to the people that I speak to.
Right.
He doesn't want to do, but that's a different story.
Right. And a secondary statement to what I was, just to draw a conclusion of what I was heading for in an overall picture. After he did this, on top of spending all that dedicated time into trying to discredit him from stuff that from an overall 20-year span, then he began to pick apart the question, and then he misquoted him. I mean, I should know. I was the host of the show. I actually heard the context of it. I even went back and rewatched the video, and I'm thinking, oh my God, does Michael Brown do this to everybody? Because if he does, no wonder everybody follows him, because he takes everybody's words and twists them up. It's really,
William, this is a very, very common thing. We'll find it. That's why I wanted to deal with specific types of logical fallacies, and I'll bring them up as we go along when we start going through his book.
Great.
When I quote from one of the other books.
Great.
I'm going to actually quote the logical fallacies involved. Let me just finish a few, because I do want to finish tonight.
Yes, sir.
Maybe there's somebody wrote me a question. I promise I would answer them.
Okay.
I'd really like to do it tonight if I can. If not, I'll do it next week. Okay.
Yes.
Another one that's very common is called the ad hominem, which is basically against the person. Now, there's two forms that are actually very well known for Brown. So let me just read here ad hominem. Again, from my book here. Often, in argument, we attack the person with whom we're contesting and not the person's argument. Very common. The result is the ad hominem appeal. Ad hominem is Latin for to the man. The fallacy of ad hominem is an argument that attacks the person who makes an assertion rather than the person's argument. Now, there's another form of it, which is ad hominem tu quo, which I'll read from here also, because this is the one that's really very common, and this is one that deals actually with what he's saying in this particular lecture he has, on unequal weights and measures. So let's read what he says here. Still another version of the ad hominem results when we insist that an argument is worthless because those proposing it fail to heed their own advice. This is sometimes called this is sometimes termed the tu quo quo. My Latin is not very good. I didn't go to Latin school. You also fallacy.
Okay.
The tu quo quo fallacy is an argument that charges someone with acting in a manner inconsistent with the position he or she is advocating. In other words, when Brown says here that counter-missionaries are their whole practice of using one canon of criticism when treating the New Testament while using an entirely different canon of criticism when treating the Talmud and Tanakh smacks of unequal weights and measures. That's actually what this fallacy is. Because even if true, which as I've been showing here now, it's not true because there are actually two different types of measurements. Even were that to be true, it would still be a logical fallacy. It would not prove his point whatsoever.
Right.
So the whole purpose of his paper here actually is a very good study. If I was going to give a class on logical fallacies rather than on errors in Christianity, I would probably use his paper as a text for that. Let me read from here. He has also to quote, let me see what page it is, excuse me. Okay, I missed the page here. Okay, this fallacy is committed when it is concluded the person's claim is false because it is inconsistent with something else the person has said, or two, what a person says is inconsistent with his actions. Again, that's exactly a good reading of exactly what Dr. Brown is actually saying here.
Okay.
Okay. So these are two types of ad hominem: attacking the person or attacking the person because, you know, they're being somewhat hypocritical. Being a hypocrite does not mean that your arguments aren't true.
Right.
It just means you're being a hypocrite. Okay. That doesn't mean that your argument is true.
Right.
It just means you should examine your same things. This actually comes under this actually touches on some other ones. Now there are other logical fallacies I want to bring up because they're going to come up all the time and we see this, and I want to preclude these. One is called the appeal to authority. Now this is very interesting. For example, if Dr. Brown would appeal to, you know, it says in the book of Revelation such and such and such and such, to me, to tell me as if it's a proof, it's an appeal to authority which has obviously no value to me, because I don't accept the New Testament. An interesting story about that happened to me once. I was at one of Dr. Brown's debates, and afterwards, people mingle together and talk. So in the discussion, I was talking with somebody about some kind of issue, and this person quoted me from the book of Revelations. So I politely answered the person, the book of Revelations is not scripture, it's not from God.
Right.
I thought the person would have a heart attack on the place. Mom was having, I thought I'd have to call, an ambulance to take her out. It's going crazy. But appeal to authority is it's a false authority. Okay. Now we find this a lot. Let me just read you what it says here.
Okay.
The fallacy of false authority is an argument that violates any of the criteria for a justifiable appeal to authority. Now what this means is, as a Jew, there's certain things we take as authority. There's Christians, certain things you take as authority also. For example, as a Jew, I take authority from the Tanakh. And there's other things. When they quote rabbinical literature to try and say that I'm wrong about something.
I'm going to try to reconnect with him because I had a broken signal. Bear with me 1 second. Have to do that from time to time to free up the cache, I guess, the video cache that's stored on here sometimes. Let's see if we get him. We got you?
Yeah, what happened?
That's much better. It was actually getting really garbled, and sometimes Skype does that. I have to disconnect and reconnect again to free it up again. So you're back good again. Go ahead and continue where you left off.
Maybe I should just close the YouTube. I'm going to close the YouTube.
So you know what? That would be helpful probably. So I didn't think about that. Okay. Good point. Yes, sir.
Now I see myself here.
Okay. Very good.
That's because I haven't put on that yet.
Now you want to keep your video on so we can see you though.
Okay. It's not taking my video here.
Let's see. So when you click on your little video icon, it's not opening up for you?
No, it's not.
Okay, let me try this again.
Maybe it's on your side. Maybe you have something else, something on your side there.
No, it's actually video is going to be on the permission of the giver. So let me hang up again. I'll call you back again because actually when I called you back, it actually came on right away. You clicked something and it shut it off. So let's try that again. Here we go. Let's try it one more time here. Let's see. Call. And we'll see if it'll stick on this time. That'll be good. It's a good show. Good show. Okay. Now I know we're connected, but I still don't see video.
I don't see video either.
Interesting. Okay, well, we can still continue if you want to. I guess video is not critical for the rest of the show anyway. I'd hate for it to take up too much time for because I know you've got a quite busy schedule as well. So.
Okay, I don't know why it's missing.
Okay. No
Now
problem.
I can bend over. You don't have to see my face. Not gonna okay. Now,
Right.
the fallacy of false authority is an argument that relates any criteria for a justified appeal to authority, which I just said. Thus, if an argument uses as an expert a person who in fact is not an expert in the appropriate field, if there is not consensus of expert opinion, or if we could not, even in theory, verify the claim for ourselves, the argument commits the fallacy of false authority. Where this comes out a lot of times in Dr. Brown's book and others is appeal to secular scholarship, which disagrees many times with Orthodox scholarship. And the same thing is, by the way, for Dr. Brown. Secular scholarship on the New Testament he wouldn't accept either. And so you'll see that when I deal with issues of the New Testament and I'm going to bring in any kinds of scholars, the scholars that I bring will actually be Christian scholars who are evangelicals, people who believe either the same as Dr. Brown or similar to Dr. Brown, because those are people who are authoritative in this. Or I bring actually what the text actually says.
Right.
And not other things of that nature, because these are actual authorities. This is a valid use of appeal to authority. An invalid use of appeal to authority would be to appeal to the opinion of a scholar on something in the New Testament where it's his opinion of how to interpret something as opposed to what a text says or whatever. Brown would disagree with it, and I would also. If you go through Brown's books, you'll see constantly he's appealing to either, remember, it's answering Jewish objections to Jesus. It's Jewish objections. So quotes from, for example, the New Testament, or quotes from New Testament as authority, not as trying to prove it true, but as an authority that should be accepted, is an invalid appeal to authority. Likewise, to secular scholars whose views disagree with what Orthodox Judaism would believe, for example, would be considered by me an invalid appeal to authority. Okay? Another one that we have is what's called a false dilemma. The false dilemma works like this. Let me read it to you.
Okay.
This you're going to find so familiar that you know exactly what I'm talking about here.
Okay.
A false dilemma is a fallacy in which a person uses the following pattern of reasoning. 1, either claim X is true or claim Y is true, when in fact X and Y can both be false. Claim Y is false, therefore claim X is true. We find this constantly where the options are given are either a certain particular Jewish interpretation is true or Christianity is true. So you attack this person's interpretation as if to say that Christianity has to be true. We'll see this a lot and it'll come up. Okay. There are two more that I want to do, which we find in Brown's books and in other places. And then we'll go on. The next one is called a straw man argument. Straw man argument is very common. It's only actually sounds to you very familiar from the particular story you just mentioned to me earlier. Okay. What is a straw man argument? Very common argument in debates, something that everybody who debates has to be very careful not to fall into. Okay? Straw man argument works like this. The straw man fallacy is an argument that so alters a position that the result is easy to attack in the original, and yet claims that it has provided grounds for attacking the original. What it means is essentially like this. You create a straw man. It has some kind of passing similarity to what the person is, but it's not really what their argument is. And then you spend your time attacking that argument, which was not the original argument given in the first place.
Right. That makes sense.
I think, William, that sounds very familiar to the discussion that you talked about with Toby Signer.
Right.
That basically he builds up a thing which wasn't really what the argument was and attacks that as if he's actually attacking the substance of the argument that Tovia gave.
Right.
We find this is constantly, it's a constant fallacy in arguments. We find it all over the place in missionary arguments. Okay?
Right.
And the last one I want to do is called a red herring. Now, a straw man, of course, obviously know what it means because you live out in the country there, so in fields they have straw men.
Yes, sir.
That's so to fool the birds into thinking that somebody's there.
Yeah.
That's where it comes from.
Right.
The last one I'm going to do is called the red herring. Now, the red herring, how it works like this, is that I believe what they used to do is they used to take a fish, when you had dogs or something trying to catch a scent, they would take a fish across that, which would mask the scent and make it go another way, drawing you away from the actual subject. That's called the red herring, where you essentially throw something in that is totally different from the actual argument in question, and then you argue about that, and you don't really get about the real meat, the real facts, issues that we talked about.
Right.
So here was red herring, a form of psychological distraction. The fallacy of red herring is the introduction of a logically separate and irrelevant issue in a discussion. He tells about here, sorry, I'm basically quoting. The story is told that dog trainers used to teach hunting hounds to follow a trail by dragging the fresh carcass of a bird, rabbit, bird, squirrel, or other prey through a field. This track was allowed to grow cold overnight. The next morning, a smoked red herring, which had been allowed to ripen, to smell, was dragged over the original trail. The young dog was then set off on the original trail. When he came to the scent of the red herring, he would be distracted by the fresher, stronger odor, and his trainer will put him back on the scent of his original prey. So essentially what it is sidetracking into an issue which really isn't what the issue is about. So again, to summarize what we talked about today, number one is that our issue is not unequal weights and measures because Christianity and Judaism have a whole different system of looking at things, whole different belief system on things, whole different things. What we're talking about is being fair weights and measures. When we criticize and when we answer, we have to answer in a fair manner. One that takes into consideration what the other person is actually saying. We don't want to fall into logical fallacies and give answers that sound good in debates. There's an English word called sophistry. We don't want sophistic types of discussions which are filled with fallacies that sound good but don't really deal with the actual issues. We want to deal actually with what people believe and actually what the issues are. Now, next week, I'm actually going to start going into what he says. Dr. Brown mentions 3 areas in which anti-missionaries attack Christianity and New Testament, which he feels are being hypocritical. One is called hyperliterality, which obviously means to take verses at the literal sense, alleged contradictions, and alleged misquotes. So next week we're going to start on the first one, hyperliterality.
Okay.
And then we're going to go through everything that he has there. I'm not going to do every single one that he has. I'll leave you to look at it, but I'm going to give you the tools that you can realize where he's going off on some of these things.
Okay, that makes sense. Okay.
We have a few minutes.
Do you want to address the question from last week from the gentleman who had a question? You want to hit that?
Yeah, I have
fast?
a question from last week.
Okay.
If there was any question for this week that I didn't really see,
okay,
that you think I should answer, then I will do that.
I only saw one, and I think we mentioned it already. There may be more, but I didn't notice them. I would like to ask everybody who's watching, if you have a specific question you want to ask on the show, you need to type in Tanakh Talk before your question, because then it will flag and I'll be able to spot it because it comes up in a yellow box and I'll be able to spot it real easily. Otherwise, I'm just going to dismiss it as conversation between the two. George Hall commented, he actually typed it in Tanakh Talk, but he was agreeing with your statement, dealing with issues, not the person. That's the actual fair way of doing it. Forget the person, deal with the issue.
We want to deal really with the issues, what the arguments are, not with the person.
Right, absolutely. So
that's really not what it is. In fact, I hold very strongly that when it comes to arguing with people, it should be done in a respectful manner. His personality, what you think about somebody, is really something on the side. You really deal with the issues.
Right, certainly.
Now, I want to read a question that was given to me on YouTube. By the way, if you have a question that you think about, the best place to drop it is on YouTube, because I look at that And if it's something I can answer quickly, I'll answer it there. If it's a question that brings things up that I think are of value to discuss here, I'll discuss it here.
And to clarify, just to clarify what Rabbi is saying, like tonight, for example, if you've got a question, put it on here now. Now, we may not see it tonight, but when we go back to rewatch the video, the live chat actually appears in the video when you go back and replay it. So your question won't get overlooked as long as one of us goes back and watches it. But
well, actually, William, what is even better is on YouTube, it has a comment section below it. And if you look at the last two sessions, there's an active comment down there.
Oh, excellent. Okay. Very good.
Okay. If you have a question, put it there. If it's something that it's a short question, but if it's something that deals with a number of interesting issues, I will deal with it here now. Okay. So this person gave me a question. Actually, it's quite a long answer, so I probably won't answer all of it now, but I'll just read you what his comment was, and then we'll go through some of the issues he talks about. So the person's name, he called himself the 10th man, just to give him a plug. I hope he feels good that. So he says that there's certain false assumptions underneath what I'm saying. So he says the first false assumption is that Christianity is a daughter of Judaism gone astray. The truth is Orthodox Judaism and Christianity are both surviving sister sects of Judaism from the Second Temple period. Therefore, contrary to this video, Christian Midrash is just as valid as Orthodox Judaism's Midrash.
Rabbi, slow down. If you don't mind, slow down just a little bit when you read, okay? Okay.
Okay. The second hidden false assumption is that the Judaism being expounded here is the same Judaism of our ancient grandfathers. The truth is what is being expounded is post-Rambam Jewish theology. Much of this theology is a subtle response to Christianity. The bottom line is this whole debate is about the differences between two sister sects of Judaism, some of which reflects 2,000 years of theological evolution. The reason why this is important, I'm actually going to be dealing with a lot of these issues when we deal with Brown's first book, the first section called General Objections.
Okay.
He deals with a lot of important issues between Christianity and Judaism. The modern Messianic sect of Christianity tries to very much to blur the differences that exist and blur the historical differences and everything like that. For that reason, I feel it's an important thing to answer here rather than just answering it there on YouTube. So I'm going to do it. There's a lot of things that he has here to unpack. So there's a lot of things I want to discuss about. And a lot of these are going to be parts of lectures later on. So I will give shorter answers here because they're going to come up in later on even more depth. So the first thing he mentions here is Christianity and Judaism being sister sects. What do you mean by sister sects is essentially like this. They have the same parent, meaning that at some time Judaism, they were all the same thing, and then Judaism took one way and Christianity took another way. But that's really a false reading of history.
Okay.
Okay? It's a false reading of history for a number of reasons. One of the historical reasons we're going to find out when I specifically talk about Judaism, Rabbinic Judaism, is that Judaism today, if we were going to use the name for it in the First Temple time, it would be called Pharisaic Judaism. Josephus, for example, mentions Rabbi Shimon as the rabbinic leader of the time, the Pharisee leader of the time. Okay, the New Testament mentions Gamaliel. These were people in the rabbinic, order of development. These are the people that we follow. Okay, Christianity actually split off from them. I do want to discuss it in a specific lecture where I'm going to talk about Judaism and Christianity, but this is very important to understand. It's not as if there was a proto-Judaism. And from this proto-Judaism came out Christianity and Judaism. What there was is Pharisaic Judaism, which was the main Judaism at the time. Josephus is clear about this, and this is going to be part of a whole lecture about Rabbinic Judaism to begin with. There was Pharisaic Judaism. That was Judaism, recognized all over as the Judaism that people followed. And Christianity, as is clear from the New Testament, and majority of scholars and even Christian scholars believe that the Jesus movement came basically out of that. Secondly, Christianity essentially becomes its own religion when Paul goes to the Gentiles. By the end of the first century, we know from Pliny the Younger, that by that time, the non-Jewish Christians were worshiping Jesus as a god. And we know that the majority of Christians by the end of the first century were, in fact, non-Jewish. So the religion, in fact, had changed. It left Judaism completely. It's not a question of something within Judaism. In fact, it actually left Judaism. And we can talk about the different types of sects. But that was really by the end of the time. Now, I'm going to be talking in a lecture that's going to come up pretty soon about the historical Jesus. So we will deal with that kind of issue.
Okay, gotcha.
Okay?
Very good.
Let's see. Let me skip one of his. I was going to go with him in order, but I'm going to actually skip because of his second point about Christian Medrash and Orthodox Medrash. That's going to take a little bit longer than the time we have. I see we're almost coming up on an hour.
Right.
And I like to keep it an hour. People don't want to waste and take too much of the time.
Right.
Okay. So the other thing he said is Judaism not the same as the ancient Judaism and modern Judaism post-Rambam. That's a total absolute fallacy. It shows a complete...
Okay, hold on. Restate that. It was a little fast, and I want to hear what was a fallacy exactly.
He said that Judaism is not the same as ancient first century Judaism. That modern Judaism is post-Rambam in both its theology and whatever. This is an absolute fallacy. It's an example of a total lack of knowledge of the development of Judaism and how it actually exists from that time until now. There is a straight path from Pharisaic Judaism to the Judaism of today. In both practice, the differences in practice we find in Judaism are based more on where people lived as opposed to anything else. All practice of Judaism goes back to the Talmud. If you look in the book in the works of Jewish law, the codes of law, you can trace everything back to the Talmud, and the Talmud traces it back to the Tanakh, where necessary, or in the case that there were decrees made because of that. As far as theology, the Rambam wasn't even the first on that. The first book written on theology, of which the Rambam is taken from, is actually Sadi Gaon, who was in the, he wrote in the late 9th, early 10th century. And everything in his work is drawn directly from verses in the Tanakh and also sometimes from the Talmud. So all of these things actually trace themselves specifically all the way back to the Tanakh. They are not post-Rambam. Everything is actually, can be traced all back to the Talmud. Even the Rambam, everything he says can be traced back to the Talmud or to various verses in the Tanakh, which he, of course, quotes. So those are two of the things that he talked about. The other ones we'll try and do them next week.
Okay, fair enough.
As we have time. Next week will be a little bit more meaty, as we're going to start going into some of those complaints that Brown has about what actually counter missionaries say, and we're going to show that actually it's somewhat more problematic for him, but we'll leave it at that.
Very good. Well, I'm glad we got to talk about a lot of the stuff you talked about tonight. So, in fact, I've been trying to get that off my chest for a long time about that video with Dr. Brown, taking out of context and stuff with Rabbi Singer on my show. I was thinking, that's been like sitting on me forever. So thanks for letting me get that off my chest. So that'll be good. So we'll see you, Hashem willing, same time, same place next week. And do you have a presumptive title you're going to go for? I know it might change before then, but it might be a little teaser.
Well, no, we're still continuing the same thing. It's going to still be fair weights and measures until we finish with it.
Okay.
It's a lecture that we will probably going for a couple weeks.
Okay, very good.
I expect at least 2 or 3 more weeks to finish all the material.
Okay.
Depending on how fast I talk.
If I stop slowing you down, you might be able to soar about 2 hours worth of information in an hour. So. Yeah,
I know. And then after that, the lecture that will be after that is we're going to go back. Actually, to continue from what was last week, where we talked about Tanakh,
okay,
we're going to actually compare the Tanakh with the New Testament and show why the New Testament is not Scripture.
Okay, very good. That sounds good. Well, appreciate your time. And for all you viewers out there, be sure to, if you haven't already, subscribe to the YouTube channel. Remember to make sure to turn on notifications because it's not going to do you any good to subscribe otherwise. And then if you like what's going on here, share the video with your friends and also like it on YouTube because that will help generate more searches whenever people will search for topics like this. So be sure to do that. And if you want to follow me along and help me along my journey, you can go to TanakTalk.com, and at the bottom of the page you'll find a donate button there, and that way you can kind of help us along here. I really appreciate all your help, and we look forward to seeing you guys same time, same place next week. Like I said earlier, Hashem willing. So y'all have a great week, Shavuot Tov, and until then, we'll see you on the other side. Take care, everybody. Shalom, shalom.